Now, we know that what's happening there matters, full stop, but it also matters here in the dynamic, okay? And I want to show you the kind of state of tension here in America about what's happening in the Middle East and kind of debate what this is really about. City Council, Oakland, California, 2 nights ago, the council voted to pass a resolution calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Yeah, I know, a city council, like what the, but anyway, look at the scene.
I support the right of Palestinians to resist occupation, including through Hamas, the armed wing of the unified Palestinian resistance.
As an Arab, asking with this context to condemn Hamas is very anti-Arab racist.
The notion that this was a massacre of Jews is a fabricated narrative.
There's not been beheadings of babies and rapings. Israel murdered their own people on October 7th.
Question. Did anyone else notice that those who oppose this resolution are old white supremacists?
Now, allowing for the fact that people who come to these open hearings aren't always going to say things that are correct or cogent, but the tenor is pretty consistent, all right? The council passed the resolution but rejected language which condemns Hamas. I don't know why they were even considering this. They have absolutely no jurisdiction over it. But the sentiments are not unfamiliar. So let's debate, okay? We have two people who understand the two sides of this very, very well. Professors, both. Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, author of The War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism, and Marc Lamont Hill, professor and host of UpFront on Al Jazeera. Good to have you both. Professor Dershowitz, what do you make of the current state of play?
Well, let's remember, there's nobody seeking a two-state solution. There hasn't been a single sign. I've watched every protest. I challenge anybody to come up with a single sign at any protest that called for the two-state solution. Every protest is against the existence of Israel. They claim it's for a ceasefire, but there is a pause now. Why would you have a protest now when there's a pause and the pause may be going forward? This is all about whether Israel has the right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people. Anybody who supports the two-state solution, anybody who supports a state for Palestine alongside with a state for the Jewish people in Israel must be opposed to these violent acts. The only other thing I'm saying is that we're on the verge of having another 1970s where young kids became terrorists and joined with terrorists and tried to blow up universities like University of Wisconsin, tried to blow up Fort Dix. We're getting close to having a movement of young people who are revolutionaries, who want to overthrow the United States. And remember, these protests are as much against the United States as they are against the existence of the state of Israel. They are not in favor of the Palestinian people. If they were, they would seek a two-state solution. And the only way to get a two-state solution is to make sure Hamas is not part of that process.
Professor Hill, respond as you see fit with one piece of context that, are you surprised that condemning Hamas, a terror organization as designated by the United States and the United Nations, is not more a part of the cause of concern among people who are pro-Palestine?
I'll answer that question, but I want to first respond directly to what Alan said, because Alan said something very important and accurate, but also a bit of a sleight of hand. He's right. At these rallies, people aren't calling for a two-state solution. I would agree. Why? They're not calling for a two-state solution because right now Gaza is being bombed. It is being destroyed. 1.7 million Palestinians are now homeless in the Gaza Strip. There's only 2.2 million in the Strip. Schools, hospitals, mosques, churches have all been destroyed. The protests are not for a diplomatic resolution. The protests are to stop the bleeding. It's to stop the bombing. Similarly, we had a March for Israel rally in D.C. 2 weeks ago. People weren't crying out for a two-state solution there either. On October 8th, after Israel had been bombed, people weren't on TV saying we need a two-state solution. No, they were responding to the attacks from Hamas on October 7th. So to point out that people aren't calling for a two-state solution when that's not what we're talking about at the moment doesn't mean that people aren't invested in a diplomatic and peaceful resolution. I also, Alan, it's amazing that I was able to remain silent your entire time, and yet you're still going. This is like an illegal occupation of the conversation. The other piece here that I think is important, and I think you're right, Chris, is that there isn't a lot of condemnation, explicit condemnation of Hamas being foregrounded in some of these rallies. Doesn't mean that people agree with Hamas, but again, it's not the foregrounded issue. because to completely denounce Hamas and not focus on what Israel is doing is to not move anywhere closer to a resolution that produces peace and justice and safety and self-determination for the Palestinian people.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of News Nation's fact-driven coverage.